Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Spiritual Humanism lecture. As you may know, Spiritual Humanism series lectures are hosted by the Institute for Advanced Humanities Studies in Peking University. And my name is Wu Ruihan. I'm an assistant researcher in IIHS and also a postdoc in Southeast University. I'm very honored to be today's moderator, and I'll have our dearest Professor Mary Evelyn Tucker to deliver this fascinating lecture titled as Being at Home in the Cosmos, an Evolutionary and Confucian Perspective. Professor Tucker is in New Haven, and now it has been late in night. So we appreciate you a lot for your generous to share your research and wisdom with us in such a special time. And also, thanks for every audience for joining us into this intellectual adventure in a workday morning. So first of all, let me introduce Professor Tucker to you. Professor Tucker works at Yale University, both in the School of Environment and the Divinity School. Her research fields are ecological philosophy and religion and indigenous studies. She is co-director of the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. She has organized 10 conferences on world religion and ecology at Harvard. And she also served on the well-known International Earth Charter Drafting Committee and was a member of the Earth Charter International Council. For most of us, Professor Tucker's most famous work might be the Emmy Award-winning film Journey of the Universe. So if you haven't watched it yet, please check it out after today's event. And for me personally, I have known Mary for several years. In 2019, we had a nice discussion in Beijing, very expressive for me, but not long enough. And after that, we haven't met in a long time. So I'm very excited about today's event. And now let's welcome Professor Mary Evelyn Tucker to present us this wonderful lecture. Okay, Mary?
Thank you so much. I'm most appreciative of your introduction and your friendship. And all of those who are listening, thank you so much for Monday morning coming to this lecture. And I'm especially grateful, of course, for Due Ming, who was such an inspiration to us way back in graduate school, my husband, John Grimm, and myself. And he, as a Confucian scholar, along with my professor, Professor DeBarry, William Theodore DeBarry at Columbia, and Thomas Berry, all three of them were extraordinary inspirations to us. And when we did the conferences at Harvard for 3 years on world religions and ecology, Professor Du welcomed us each time for a dinner at his home to begin the conferences and attended all of them. So for many reasons, we're grateful to him and we hope his health and his wife are both well. So let me begin, and I look forward to your questions as well. I'll begin with a quote from Professor Du from his lecture on spiritual humanism that he delivered in 2018 at the 24th World Congress of Philosophy. He writes, "Our innate sense of being connected in a sympathetic resonance with heaven, earth, and the myriad things may very well be the deepest and commonest source for human greatness." That's a theme of this talk, clearly. I want to begin with evolution as a new idea. This news is still new, the concept of evolution, that is. We humans are trying to absorb what this is and what it means to us. Evolution is one of the most remarkable discoveries of modern science over many decades of research. The theory of biological evolution, as first presented by Charles Darwin in his book On the Origin of Species, is only 160 years old. Even for Darwin, the implications of human evolution were astounding and unsettling. This was even more the case for his wife, as she feared it would undermine the widely accepted Christian worldview of a creator God. She wondered, for example, if she and her husband would be together in heaven if this negated his belief in God. Similarly, the idea of cosmic evolution as discovered by 20th century scientists is only slowly being understood by a broad public. The notion that we live in a vast changing universe is hard to absorb. Indeed, moving from a picture of a static cosmos to a dynamic cosmogenesis is one of the greatest challenges for modern humans. Through scientific research and discovery, we have come to know many of the factual details of evolution. That the universe is nearly 14 billion years old is very recent knowledge. That there are 2 trillion galaxies was not known by our grandparents or their parents. The common understanding was there was just one, our Milky Way galaxy. Now we are aware of dark energy and dark matter as fundamental to the shaping of galaxies and instrumental in the expansion of our universe. But the larger implications of all this new knowledge for how we view ourselves and live our lives still eludes us. We are trying to grasp the significance of deep evolutionary time and expansive galactic space. Why is this so challenging? Partly because evolution has been taught within the scientific community primarily as a series of facts without larger coherence or meaning. The separation of facts and values is foundational to science and the empirical method. At the same time, some religions have not regarded evolution with the same significance as their own scriptures and traditions. They have held evolution at a distance, part of science, but not compatible with religion. The gap between these two is still large. For some in Christianity, the gap is so large that we're still trying to overcome it. Moreover, modern secularism has stripped away a larger sense of meaning and purpose in our lives, leaving many people lost, alienated, and adrift. Secularism has left religion behind and marginalized spirituality in favor of rationalism. Materialism has stepped into the breach, replacing the search for spiritual meaning with the clamor for more goods and entertainment. Before we can find our way back home in the universe, we need to embrace evolution as an unfolding process woven through with creativity. This is the broader context in which we might ponder the question of seeing the cosmos as home. Evolution needs to be realized in the human mind, experienced in the body, and absorbed in the spirit. This will take time. But with conscious effort and careful reflection, we can see ourselves as part of a dynamic, integrated whole, cosmos, Earth, and humans. Humans have created cosmological and ecological worldviews that have understood this well before the rise of science. Indigenous traditions come to mind, along with many of the world's religions. Confucianism, in particular, with its continuity of being between these realms, is an invaluable bridge for humans trying to situate themselves in a larger sense of universe and earth. This paper concludes with a discussion of Confucianism in this regard. But first, we need to look at some of the obstacles to getting there. Religious doubt, science and religion in conflict. Science and religion, as we know, have been in tension for the last several centuries in the West. One might say this is especially true since Copernicus discovered and Galileo proved that the Earth revolves around the sun. Poor Galileo, he was only trying to deliver the truth by reporting his observations accurately. His telescope changed the long accepted worldview inherited from Ptolemy in the 2nd century. Through Galileo's eyes and his mathematical calculations, Copernicus's thesis was confirmed. We don't live in an Earth-centered universe, but a sun-centered one. The medieval worldview of a geocentric universe was shattered. The Copernican heliocentric universe was affirmed. The church could not accept this as they saw it as heresy. They felt that somehow this contradicted scripture, which should be accepted literally. Copernicus was hesitant to publish his thesis, fearing the repercussions from the church. Indeed, he delayed making his book available until 1543, just before he died. It is such a huge shift in understanding and consciousness that it is fair to say that even modern humans have not fully absorbed the full implications of this discovery. Namely, we and Earth are not the center of things. Some 1800 years earlier, the Greek philosopher Aristarchus, who lived on the island of Samos, first surmised that the Earth revolves around the sun. In Samos, where we made the film Journey of the Universe, there is a statue commemorating him in one of the piazzas. On the base was carved, Aristarchus, who discovered the Earth revolts around the sun. Perhaps this is true metaphorically. It is a revolution in thinking. Thus, it wasn't simply a mistake in spelling, revolt rather than revolve. When a worldview is challenged or proven wrong, there is a price to pay, and the cost may be high. Galileo, for example, was subject to a trial by church authorities during the Inquisition. He was ultimately condemned for his views, which were considered heretical. Rather than jail, he was sentenced to house arrest in 1633, which lasted until he died almost a decade later. His books, along with those of Copernicus and Johann Kepler, were banned. They were not taken off the Index of Forbidden Books until 1835. This condemnation, while clearly mistaken, was only officially addressed by the Catholic Church more than 350 years later. After a decade of study by a papal commission established in 1981, no definitive results were reported on the Galileo case. Instead, on October 31st, 1992, Pope John Paul II delivered a speech at the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. There he acknowledged in a convoluted way that misunderstandings had arisen, but now are over. Quote, a tragic mutual incomprehension has been interpreted as the reflection of a fundamental opposition between science and faith. The clarifications furnished by recent historical studies enable us to state that this sad misunderstanding now belongs to the past, unquote. 4 years later, John Paul issued a statement on evolution declaring that, quote, fresh knowledge leads to recognition of the theory of evolution as more than just a hypothesis. He also affirmed that the teaching of evolution and religious faith could coexist. Progress, one might say, after many centuries of religious doubt and obfuscation. Scientific doubt from self and others. We might also note that sometimes scientists themselves cannot accept an unexpected change of worldview. So we've just looked at the religious resistance, and now we're going to look at the scientific resistance. Let's look at two examples, Albert Einstein and Alfred Wegener. From 1917, Einstein did not believe his own equations in the general theory of relativity regarding the early universe as expanding. He held to the notion of a static universe. It took him many years to accept the scientific facts through the work of other astrophysicists. The Jesuit scientist Georges Lemaitre published a significant paper in 1927 on the expanding universe, relying on the theory of general relativity. Einstein dismissed the paper saying, quote, your calculations are correct, but your physics are atrocious, unquote. In January 1931, Einstein visited Edwin Hubble and looked into the massive telescope on Mount Wilson in Southern California, where he was doing research. Hubble had discovered 2 years earlier that galaxies were moving away from one another. After much consideration of both theory and observation, Einstein delivered a paper at the Prussian Academy of Sciences in April 1931, finally accepting what his older cosmology obscured. His worldview cracked open to embrace an expanding universe after decades. He had to change his equations back to what he first had calculated in 1917 and remove the cosmological constant, the fudge factor. Einstein later admitted that this was the greatest blunder of his life. This cosmological constant became a primary component of the thesis of dark energy and dark matter, pushing the expansion of the universe. Then there is Alfred Wegener, who proposed the theory of continental drift, which led eventually to the discovery of plate tectonics. His study on the origin of continents, published in 1912, revealed that continental plates had moved over time, even at one point forming a continental whole, Pangaea. But scientists doubted this. It didn't seem possible or plausible. These massive continents moving, how could that be? Wegener's theory was marginalized and dismissed. It took some 50 years for his ideas to be accepted in the scientific community, well after his death. Nonetheless, he continued writing and leading challenging polar expeditions to Greenland. He died there in 1930 of starvation while he was returning from delivering food to another remote research site. Such is the persistence of scientific research, even in the face of opposition. An amazing story, isn't it? Change is difficult when it means leaving behind one worldview or cosmology and moving into another. We find this in the cases of Galileo, with opposition from the church, Einstein with his own self-doubt, and Wegener with criticism from other scientists. We can see this too in religious communities that are afraid to step into the great current of evolution, lest they be swept away into unbelief in a creator God. But skepticism need not lead to despair or unraveling of worldviews. It can give rise to more comprehensive and inclusive worldviews and ethics. Next part is emerging new cosmology, scientific and spiritual. This is where we are now. Science is offering, from all of its various disciplines, a comprehensive evolutionary cosmology that can bring together the rich continuity of being, cosmos, earth, human. Evolution is still largely understood in segments that are siloed into disciplines within academia, from physics and astronomy to geology and earth sciences to biology and ecology. How to bring these disciplines together for an integrative story of evolution is still not clear. Envisioning a scientifically based narration that includes meaning and value continues to elude academics. As a counterpoint, this is what we are offering in Journey of the Universe, which came out 10 years ago. In this multimedia project that includes a film, book, and conversations, and online classes as well, we are weaving science and spiritual humanism together. And incidentally, those classes through Coursera are available in Chinese, and later you will get the links for that. Our position is that facts without values are insufficient for humans to live an integrated and meaningful life. Radical secularism and boundless materialism are empty and insufficient to respond to the human call for meaning and purpose. And you know this in China, in America, and many parts of the world. The widespread despair, alienation, and addictions in our American society would be some reflection of this. At the same time, religions are trying to understand how and why their traditional cosmologies are considered inadequate in light of this new evolutionary cosmology. For thousands of years, religions created and transmitted cosmologies with commanding authority. They controlled the dominant worldviews of a particular culture and proclaimed the ethics that followed from these perspectives. These worldviews became invoked in human endeavors that were both liberating and limiting. Christianity, for example, provided a basis for elevating human dignity in its social justice teachings, especially in the last 150 years. Yet, regrettably, as we know, in the name of religion, some Christians conquered, enslaved, or missionized others, spreading their hierarchical worldviews and authoritarian ethics at cost to life and life ways. These claims to absolute truth have become contested, but only now are we seeing the full implications of these mindsets. Systematic oppression of others in the name of beliefs and practices is historic fact, revealed in contemporary consequences. Now in the United States, Native peoples, African Americans, Latino Americans, and Asian Americans are pushing back on Christian white supremacy and racist control. History must be retold to reflect not just nationalist narratives of exceptionalism, but what actually happened in the name of conquest and greed. Slavery and oppression of minorities is a raw underside of Western and other histories, often rationalized with political aspirations, capitalist agendas, and missionizing truth claims. So, how do we break through to a new cosmology that is inclusive of people and planet, valuing both cultural and biological diversity? This will take time, effort, and persistence. We've only recently been discovering such a new cosmology and broader ecology, which cultural historian Thomas Berry encouraged in his call for a new story in 1978. Such an integrating story has been left out of our modern Western worldviews and ethics. Our consciousness and conscience in the modern period has focused on the human, our rights and liberties, our privileges and superiorities. Individualism and human exceptionalism are dominant. Responsibilities to the whole community of life is rarely mentioned, except in environmental circles. And even then, there is a focus largely on practical action and policy concerns. The benefit of nature for humans is seen primarily in monetizing nature by measuring ecosystem services. How does a wetland serve us? How does a forest serve us? That's ecosystem services. Even now, financial solutions for our climate emergency are prioritized. The market needs to adjust as profits will be lost. The intrinsic value of nature is sidelined and claims to the moral value of nature are largely ignored. The aesthetic and recreational value of nature is recognized, but not the deep value of nature in itself. That argument is largely buried in obscure journals of environmental ethics, read by a few and largely dismissed by other philosophers as romantic or irrelevant. Debates on the intrinsic versus the utilitarian value of nature have not advanced the issue, and pragmatism has marginalized the spiritual dimensions of nature. Thus, ethics in the West have remained focused primarily on the human. In contrast, it might be noted that Confucianism sees the moral value of nature as fundamental to its worldview. This is why humans can cultivate themselves in relation to the rhythms and cycles of nature. Next section is holistic cosmology and ecological ethics from science and religion. The question remains then, how do we move forward to embrace cosmologies and ethics that celebrate the continuity of being and its implications for more comprehensive ethics that include the cosmos and the life world? I would suggest that new openings are emerging from the integrative insights of both science and religion. First, we can highlight system sciences which includes various fields of natural science as well as social science. And some of this has been emerging for several decades, but now more than ever, because system sciences embrace holism and affirms the complex interaction of ecosystems. It overcomes this silo and disciplinolatry, as some have called it. For example, ecologists, animal behaviorists, biologists, and other system scientists are now showing us the living and communicative dimensions of species and ecosystems. These are being experienced as resonant and reciprocal, not dead or disposable. With such an integrative understanding, we begin to discover and recover the need for a more inclusive environmental ethics, embracing the living Earth community. This is true in a variety of examples I will cite here. And I find this very exciting. I hope you will as well. The research and literature on the aliveness of nature and the sentience of other species is bursting forth all around us. Ever since Jane Goodall broke the species barrier by acknowledging chimpanzees as intelligent social beings, something new has broken through in modern consciousness. This is understood by indigenous people for millennia, that our kin on this planet are communicating in all kinds of ways not yet fully understood. And this is what I mean by sentience that's differentiated in other species, birds, animals, fish, and reptiles. Animal behaviorists such as Franz de Waal and Mark Beckhoff have extended Goodall's discoveries regarding chimps. Not only do our primate cousins use tools, which was Goodall's major discovery, but they have developed social systems of bonding and created community. They clearly have a wide range of emotions, from delight in play, satisfaction in food, fear in conflict, and grief in witnessing death. And some have said they even have rituals and have culture in terms of their societies that they've created. In addition, the migrating patterns of fish and birds are becoming more visible. Our salmon kin migrate hundreds of miles out to the ocean and back to spawn in the same place where they were born. Our bird relatives, such as the red-knot sandpiper, fly thousands of miles from South America to North America on the East Coast to mate and give birth up in Canada. Their offspring return on their own to where the parents began their journey, with no help from the parents. This is true for many Arctic migrating birds. What kind of sentience do these migrating intelligences reveal to us? And let us remind us that they are connected, no doubt, to the magnetic fields of cosmos and Earth, how they negotiate those long, long distances of migration. This is exploding in terms of our understanding, and it's so exciting, isn't it? In the biological world, our understanding of trees and forests is growing rapidly. Trees, we now know, communicate through their roots and fungi in a variety of ways. Books such as, and here are the titles, How Forests Think, The Hidden Life of Trees, The Song of Trees, are just a few examples from system scientists illuminating the complexity of the living community that surrounds us. The Forest Within is a book written by a biologist, David Haskell, and it illustrates how, for him, the forest became a place for contemplation and cultivation, in which his human subjectivity and the interiority of the forest converge. He did this for 1 year in a mandala in the forest near where he lived, and went there every day to contemplate and meditate and draw this in. Resonance and aliveness becomes embodied knowledge in such practice. Moreover, Haskell illustrates how the microcosm of the person and the macrocosm of the forest system become mirrors of one another. a communion of subjects is experienced. And that's Thomas Berry's famous term, a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. Finally, I hope you know Robin Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass. The subtitle is Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teaching of Plants. It's become a bestseller. Over 100,000 copies have been sold, and it illustrates the need to weave multiple ways of knowing: scientific, traditional, environmental knowledge from native peoples, and a spiritual understanding of the natural world. So all of these books are becoming the basis for a dynamic cosmological and ecological understanding on interrelated relationality and differentiated sentience, with the potential to give rise to a broader environmental ethics. Secondly, so I've spoken about these new system science discoveries of communication and aliveness in the world around us. And secondly, such understandings and insights from science can be complemented by the cosmological and ecological worldview of other religious and spiritual traditions, such as indigenous lifeways, even Christianity, and certainly Confucianism. Indigenous traditions and lifeways vary around the world. They embrace cosmovisions as orienting worldviews, grounding humans in the larger schema of universe and earth. Within these cosmovisions, the earth community is seen as alive and resonant, and the cosmos is envisioned as the birthing place of the whole. All creatures are considered kin and thus worthy of respect and reverence. Just what we've been describing in the scientific world is very, very ancient in the indigenous worldviews. There's also emerging eco-theology in Christian circles that is expanding the moral landscape to include the more than human world. For example, our African-American colleague and theologian at Yale Divinity School, whose name is Willie Jennings, he speaks of nature as animate and communicative. Animate and communicative. Unbelievable for a theologian, let me say. This is a radical departure for a Christian theologian from the primary focus on a transcendent other world, an omnipotent God outside of a fallen nature. This moves away from the aversion to pantheism, namely God in nature, to embrace what's being called panentheism, namely the divine present both within and beyond nature. You can see the shift, right? Jennings asserts that Christianity doesn't have a doctrine of creation and thus is deficient in appreciating the intrinsic value of nature. The concentration of Christianity has been largely anthropocentric, focused on salvation and redemption, as Thomas Berry reminded us many years ago. Thus, creation is ignored or gets short shrift in favor of otherworldly orientations. That is changing now with the emergence of eco-theology, Christian environmental ethics, and creation-centered spirituality. And there is an explosion of Christian environmentalism in the West and in many other parts of the world. It is evident as well that Confucianism has embraced a dynamic cosmological and ecological worldview throughout its history. This ranges from antiquity to the present, from the Book of Changes compiled in the 11th century BCE, encouraging humans to harmonize with nature's rhythms, all up to the Han Confucians, 206 BCE to 220 CE, who developed an intricate series of correspondences for human, earth, cosmic relations, and up to the Neo-Confucians of the 11th and 12th century, who embraced the diagram of the great ultimate to illustrate the origin and flow of the cosmos and earth, to the New Confucians in the contemporary period, such as Du Ming, who speak of the continuity of being. The rich cosmological resources of Confucianism need to be included in discussions of evolutionary cosmology so that the perspectives of science and spiritual humanism can be woven together. Such an integrated perspective has implications for creating a future that is not simply sustainable, but flourishing. I love that word. John and I like to say our relationship isn't just sustainable, it's flourishing, it's growing. And that's what Confucianism can bring to the discussion. Dewey Ming's reflections on spiritual humanism in his 2018 Wang Yangming lecture exemplified critical insights into this process. Drawing on his paper and his earlier writings, I will offer some comments on Confucianism in this context. Cosmological orientation, continuity of being, is the topic next. The cosmological orientation of Confucianism provides a holistic context for expressing spiritual humanism, namely communitarian ethics, modes of self-transformation, and ritual practices. These forms of spiritual humanism are interrelated, and they set in motion patterns of relational resonance between humans and the ever-expanding interrelated circles of life. The integrating impetus can be described as celebrating the generativity and creativity of the cosmos in the midst of changing daily affairs. Sheng sheng, this fecundity of things. The cosmological orientation of the Confucian worldview has been described by Dewey Ming as encompassing a continuity of being between all life forms without a radical break between the cosmic, natural, and human worlds. Heaven, earth, and humans are part of a continuous worldview that is organic, holistic, and dynamic. Dewey Ming has used the term anthropocosmic to describe this integral relatedness of humans to the cosmos. He writes, quote, "Human beings are an integral part of the chain of being, encompassing heaven, earth, and the myriad things. However, the uniqueness of being humans is the intrinsic capacity of the mind to embody the cosmos in its conscience and consciousness, Through this embodying, the mind realizes its own sensitivity, manifests true humanity, and assists in the cosmic transformation of heaven and earth." What a beautiful quote that is. Communitarian ethics. Humans are connected to one another and to the larger cosmological order through an elaborate system of communitarian ethics. The 5 relations of society are marked, for example, by virtues of mutual exchange along with differentiated respect. Reciprocity is a key to Confucian ethics and the means by which Confucian societies develop a communitarian basis so that they can become a bonded fiduciary community. Moreover, the cultivation of virtue in individuals is the basis for the interconnection of self, society, and the cosmos. As P.J. Ivanhoe observes, the activation of virtue evokes response. Quote, "This mutual dynamic of de, virtue, or kindness, and bao, response, was thought to be in the very nature of things. Some early thinkers seemed to believe it operated with the regularity and force of gravity, that virtue and its practice has implications in relation to the transforming and nourishing powers of heaven and earth," which is an extraordinary idea. And next, I'm going to talk on moral transformation. And I just want to put a footnote here. You can see I love the ideas of Confucianism. I think they are rich and important in our contemporary world, indeed indispensable. And I just want to insert that I know as well, like every tradition, philosophical or religious, that they have its underside, its sometimes authoritarian side, and so on. But I'm bringing forward these rich ideas for a truly fecund cosmology that can assist in the flourishing of the Earth community. So my next point here is moral transformation. In all of this, Confucian spiritual humanism aims at moral transformation so that individuals can realize their full personhood. Each person receives a heavenly endowed nature and thus the potential for full authenticity or even sagehood is ever present. Nonetheless, to become a noble person, a chunzu, is an achievement of continual self-examination, rigorous discipline, and the cultivation of virtue. We all have to admit when we have failed and begin again. That's cultivation. Moreover, as Due Ming observes, this process of spiritual self-transformation is a communal act. It is not an individual spiritual path aimed at one's personal salvation. It is rather an ongoing process of rectification so as to cultivate one's luminous virtue, The act of inner cultivation implies reflecting on the constituents of daily experience and bringing that experience into accord with the insight of the sages and the classics. The ultimate goal of such self-cultivation is the realization of sagehood, namely the attainment of one's cosmological being. What an amazing aspiration, the attainment of one's cosmological being. I'm going to speak now on ritual relatedness. Attainment of one's cosmological being means that humans must be attentive to one another, responsive to the needs of society, attuned to the natural world through rituals and the arts, and aware of the celestial bodies above. All of this establishes patterns of relationship. We have a lunar eclipse coming up this week, and people are very excited about it, as they rightly should. So we're attuned to the celestial bodies and the relatedness of them to us. In the Confucian context, there were rituals performed at official state ceremonials, as well as rituals at Confucian temples. However, the primary emphasis of ritual in the Confucian tradition was not necessarily liturgical ceremonies connected with places of worship, as in Western religions, but rituals involved in daily interchanges and rites of passage intended to smooth and elevate human relations. For the early Confucian thinker, Chunzi, rituals are seen as vehicles for expressing the range and depth of human emotions in appropriate context and in an adequate manner. Just think what we're missing in this time of pandemic are rituals of death, rituals of family mourning, and so on. Chunzi and Confucians understood how important it was and is to express grief, celebration of life, mourning, and hopefully joy in other rituals. Absolutely critical. Rituals thus become a means of affirming the emotional dimensions of human life. Moreover, they link humans to one another and to other key dimensions of reality, the political order, nature's seasonal cycles, and the cosmos itself. Thus, Confucian rituals are seen to be in consonance with the creativity of the cosmic order. Self-cultivation. On a personal level, the whole process of self-cultivation in Confucian spiritual humanism is aimed at achieving authenticity and sincerity through conscientious study, critical self-examination, continual effort, and a willingness to change oneself. Due Ming speaks of this as embodied knowing. Learning for oneself, not simply absorbing ideas uncritically or trying to impress others, is considered essential to this process. Thus, authenticity can only be realized by constant transformation so as to bring oneself into consonance with the creative and generative powers of heaven and earth. These teachings sought to inculcate a process in tune with the dynamic cosmological workings of nature. It thus affirmed change as a positive force in the natural order and in human affairs. This process of harmonizing with changes in the universe can be identified as a major wellspring of Confucian spiritual humanism, expressed in various forms of self-cultivation. And I just want to mention things like Tai Chi and Qigong, which have spread all over the world, are some of these forms of being in consonant with animals and birds and forms in nature and so on that allow the qi to flow through us. So Confucian and Taoist rituals and exercises, the microcosm, macrocosm of the body of the human and the body of the universe being in resonance are very, very important and embraced by people in many, many parts of the world, especially Tai Chi and Qigong. Affirming change. Unlike the Buddhists who saw the world of change as the source of suffering, Jushi and the Neo-Confucians after him affirmed change as the source of transformation in both the cosmos and the person. Now, change can be difficult, so I want to underscore this point, the positivity of change, all the way back to the Book of Change. Thus, Neo-Confucian spiritual humanism involved cultivating one's moral nature so as to bring it into harmony with the larger patterns of change in the cosmos. Each moral virtue had its cosmological component. For example, the central virtue of humaneness, Run, was seen as a source of fecundity and growth in both the individual and the cosmos. So these corresponding virtues are critical as we cultivate humaneness in ourselves. The fecundity of nature is also affected, and this is reciprocal. By practicing humaneness, one could affect the transformation of things in oneself, in society, in nature, and in the cosmos. And in so doing, one's deeper identity with reality was recognized as forming one body with all things, thus actualizing one's cosmological being. As the doctrine of the means stated it, quote, being able to assist in the transforming and nourishing powers of heaven and earth, one can form a triad with heaven and earth. I think that's a lifetime aspiration, that quote in particular. I hope I understand it when I'm in my older years. All of this for Jushi was part of a dynamic process of the mutual interaction of the qi of the person interacting with the qi of the cosmos. The flow of life and energy is seen in qi, material force or vital energy, which unifies the plant, animal, and human worlds and pervades all the elements of the cosmos as well. As Jushi put it, once a person's mind has moved, it must reach the qi of heaven and earth and mutually stimulate and interact with this qi that contracts and expands, goes and comes. And as Du Ming reminds us in his lecture and in earlier writings, qi is coherent with and consonant with the cosmos, the pre-life and the organic life. Even stones, jade has qi. So this continuity of being that Confucianism has to offer is very, very important. And those of us who love rocks and stones and why are gardens so critical in the gardens of Suzhou with the magnificent stones, rake stones, and cultivated stones, even in the lakes in southern China. Next part is filiality to heaven and earth, the Western inscription. In Confucian cosmology, then, the person is seen not as an isolated individual as we are in the West, but as someone deeply held within the creative processes of the universe and earth. Indeed, these processes are considered to be like parental forces, which give birth to humans and all species. The cosmos is termed heaven in a metaphorical sense, referring to the celestial systems overhead, while Earth is regarded as that place where all the myriad life forms arise, the 10,000 things. The 11th century Neo-Confucian philosopher Zhang Zai articulated this perspective with his notable Western inscription. He kept this on the western wall of his study. Heaven is my father, and earth is my mother, and even such a small creature as I finds an intimate place in their midst. Therefore, that which extends throughout the universe, I regard as my body, and that which directs the universe, I regard as my nature. All people are my brothers and sisters, and all things are my companions. Although written 1,000 years ago, modern Chinese still recognize this inscription and acknowledge its implications for our ongoing connection to cosmos and earth. While these verses were intended metaphorically, we now know their truth scientifically. Life arises from the generative dynamics of stars and from the intricate matrix of ecosystems. So home, in a traditional Chinese context, is the nested creativity of the cosmos and earth into which humans are born and belong. And that sense of filial responsibility back to the cosmos and earth is one of the most powerful groundings for an environmental ethics that we have of all the world's traditions. And indeed, I'd love to just share with you that the person I studied deeply in the Japanese Neo-Confucian tradition, Kaibara Eken, picked this up and spoke of the filial regard for nature. So we shouldn't cut down trees wantonly or kill birds or animals carelessly. So this filial piety to nature is actually a real grounding. And that inspired me through my graduate studies, I can tell you. Concluding part here. Participating in an evolving universe. Our calling then is to see ourselves as having a sense of wholeness and belonging that is not just social, but also cosmological and ecological, as Confucianism richly demonstrates. Similarly, as the Earth Charter, a global ethical document issued in 2000 after 10 years of drafting, states in the preamble, humanity is part of a vast evolving universe. Earth, our home, is alive with a unique community of life. Those are words that resonate deeply. Due Ming was part of the drafting committee, and he often cites that as well. How might we see ourselves as belonging to a vast evolving universe where Earth is home to the 10,000 things? And I can tell you in 1997, when Gorbachev held that document up in its drafting process, the indigenous peoples in Rio stood up and rejoiced because their worldview of the aliveness of nature was included in this international document, the first time ever. As we have observed, many cultures have embraced this perspective, beginning with indigenous peoples. Their cosmovisions have provided them with a rich sensibility of the stars as relatives and galaxies as luminous living presences. Humans are descendants of these heavenly bodies. As we say in Journey of the Universe, the stars are our ancestors. That is because the elements of life come out of the explosion of supernovas. Confucianism also clearly offers a remarkably rich cosmological perspective that is compatible with evolution and ecology. Our task then is to see cosmic and biological evolution not only as a collection of scientific facts placed in a reductionist framework and operating within mechanistic processes without meaning or purpose. How can humans engage with such a framework where matter is viewed as dead, simply a collection of objects, not a communion of subjects, as Thomas Berry has noted? This is a central phrase in Berry's thinking, in which he affirms the deep interrelatedness of interiority throughout reality, all reality, rocks and stones, mammals, birds, and humans. His call, Berry's call, is for an integrated cosmology where science and humanities are interwoven, where facts and values are braided. As Einstein said, science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind. What a wonderful insight. For as the Confucians recognize, the cosmos and the earth are indeed our home, our birthplace, a womb of intense creativity. This is evidence in the Neo-Confucian diagram of the great ultimate and the Western inscription. Now we know scientifically that Earth and all life forms came out of billions of years of cosmic evolution. The thin layer of atmosphere of our planet created the conditions for life. Geology morphed into biology as the lithosphere and hydrosphere evolved into the ecosphere. Without cosmic evolution, there is no planetary evolution or the emergence of life. And the conditions for life were established in the first 3 minutes of the rate of expansion of the early universe, with even a millisecond faster or slower, no life would have come forth. Isn't that amazing? And is this not sufficient reason to acknowledge that the cosmos, earth, and life emerge from both pattern and chaos, from Li and from Qi, if you will? And is this not the time to celebrate evolution as one dynamic process? Such an understanding of the continuity of being, as Confucianism offers, is surely grounds for a more robust cosmological ethics and a cosmopolitics, which is a new word being used to illustrate how cosmology and politics intersect, ideas and action. So this is surely grounds for a more robust cosmological ethics and a cosmopolitics, which are based on reverence and respect for the universe as that which birthed the elements of life, responsibility and reciprocity for the earth community as that which evolved and sustained life, and renewal and resilience for humans who are creating the conditions for human flourishing. All of this is necessary for participating as mutually enhancing co-creators in a vast evolving universe, which is our home. Thank you so much, and I look forward to hearing your questions and your comments. Feel free. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tucker. Thank you for your lecture. So dense, so much information that we need to digest. And before the Q&A section, we have plenty of time for Q&A section, at least 1 hour, I think. So please let me summarize it a little bit for our audience. Professor Tucker guided us to review the development of nature science, about the change of cosmology from Galileo to Einstein to Wagner, and not only the conflicts between science and religion, but also their efforts to merge with each other. Both the church and modern environment ethics have did a lot to help with the emergence of religion, of faith and science. And then we come to the holistic cosmology and the ecological ethics from science and religion. Professor Tucker introduced us many new developments in modern divinity studies and environmental ethics, and also the diversity of indigenous cultures. And undoubtedly, as she said, facts without values is not enough, which reminds us how traditional wisdom, such as Confucianism, is necessary in reflecting this question. So we came to many points in Chinese philosophy, especially in Confucianism, like the continuity of beings, like a self-cultivative and the affirm of changes. And at last, we come back to our topic, our title, being at home in the cosmos, and the perspective is both evolutionary and Confucianism. So all of this is necessary for participating as mutual enhanced co-creative in a vast evolving universe, which is our home. Quote Professor Tucker's last words. Now the time is open for Q&A section. I think Professor Du, do you have some?
Well, I simply want to appreciate our appreciation of Mary Evelyn Tucker's remarkable way of relating science to religion and how to fit the Confucian anthropocosmic vision into this cosmic narrative. I just want to show my great appreciation for that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Wei Ming. It's so wonderful to see you, and your 2018 lecture is quite extraordinary, and I will draw on it for years to come. And that spiritual humanism has such a rich cosmological and ecological dimension is, I think, a great contribution to all of us. So my lecture is a footnote to all that's in that lecture. I'm deeply indebted to rereading it recently to think about this one.
Okay, I think Professor Wang Jieba, our friend, Dr. Wang, has something to say.
Good.
Hello, Professor Tu and Professor Tucker. Such a great, amazing lecture. I'm so impressed. So from geology to theology, from anthropology to cosmology. So finally, it's kind of ontology issue. So I really, how to say, convinced that the continuity of being is our future. To have the heaven virtue flourishing to humankind. That means we are being as the home the cosmos. So thank you very much. We can go further for other discussions, and Rehan also does a very good job